first of all, welcome everyone for this this new we've teamed up with the Alumni Affairs Department on. My name is John Loftus. I'm the Assistant Dean of Development for the Graduate Division here at UC Santa Barbara. And our role in the Graduate Division is really focusing on our nearly 3,000 graduate students. We have these incredible graduate students, and we like to say that they are the engine that really drives UC Santa Barbara forward. Faculty are fantastic, but we all know that it's these graduate students that are doing the research, that are mentoring the undergraduates and moving the university forward. These graduate students get a lot of support in their departments, hopefully. And the graduate division is really there to provide complementary services, support. We do a lot of career and professional development events now, over 150 events per year, workshops, talks, events, and so on. So the format for this is pretty straightforward. We're gonna start with introductions from our esteemed panel. And then we've got a moderated discussion with thanks in part to some of the questions that were brought out from you all. And then we're going to plan on leaving some time for Q&A at the end of it. If you have questions, definitely throw those up on the group chat, and we can definitely plan to get to those. Want to thank a couple of people, Karen and Michaela from the Alumni Affairs Office for putting this together. And then of course, want to thank the panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules to get this going. So with that being said, I would love to have the panelists introduce themselves and just so they don't all go at once, we'll start with Anna.
Oh, okay. Hi, I am Ana Sandoval, and I graduated from UCSB with a PhD in sociology in 2005. I currently, through a very windy road in life, ended up at the Census Bureau. I am currently on a detail for the Integrated Partnerships and Communications part of the decennial. So pretty much what I do is I oversee the evaluation and assessment for the census marketing campaign. So all that stuff that you saw on Instagram, on Facebook, on TV, on boards, everywhere. And I'm part of that team. So that's what I do.
Excellent, excellent. And going on the alphabet, Arturo.
Hi, I'm Arturo Gonzalez. I'm a 1997 graduate of Santa Barbara, got a PhD in the Econ department. I now am the director of research for the policy team at Facebook. What that means on a practical day-to-day basis is that I lead on the creation of research projects, execution of research, to talk about how Facebook's business goals are in fact based on real data and real evidence, and try to support the policy teams in their engagements globally.
Great. And then Chris Martin.
So greetings. As you can tell, I use Zoom too much because I can do all sorts of bizarre stuff. So I got my PhD from UCSB in 1999 in physics. And as you heard from Anna, we have all taken some winding roads. Mine took me through postdocs to the South Pole, but then I was a professor at a small liberal arts college where I got tenure. Did a stint as a AAAS Congressional Fellow and did a stint on the Hill. And now I work for a nonprofit. So I am the director of science for the Kavli Foundation, where I fund the fields that are behind me, astrophysics, nanoscience, and neuroscience, and get to do that around the globe and support it. It's a lot of fun.
And I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the Kavli Institute for Theoretical Physics, celebrating 40 years and some incredible breakthrough, all there in large part because of the support from the Kavli Foundation. And then last but not least, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Sarah Kriz. I got my PhD from UCSB in 2006 in psychology. And I started on the academic route. I did a postdoc and I had a faculty position at University of Washington. And for what at that time we called the two-body problem, I went back eventually to across back the country to my spouse on the East Coast. And I've been in the DC area for the past 7 years. And I work for the MITRE Corporation. We are a not-for-profit company that runs federally funded research and development centers in partnership with the government, with the federal government. And currently I'm supporting a project, a program evaluation to look at the effectiveness of replications of teen pregnancy prevention programming.
Great, that's great, and I actually love the fact that we've got a nice intimate audience, so we can feel free to share away and ask questions. But the first question for the panel, and I'm sure some of us in the audience are thinking this: why leave the academic world? It's such a great place, all this learning. So we're going to start with Chris on that, and have the other panelists chime in with the big question of why.
Sure, I'm happy to start that. So I stayed in the academic world for a long time, got tenure and whatnot, but I was always looking to make more of a difference. Certainly as a PhD student, you get really good at one thing, but I was making a difference in that one little thing. Becoming a professor, I was educating many students and making a difference there. But I was always looking for bigger opportunities, ways of affecting even more people and having a broader leverage with my skills and also, with the interests of those around me. Having joined Kavli, it's been actually fantastic to, see the kinds of changes that you can make from the outside. I'm able to, interact with universities worldwide, certainly enable them to do more things. It is a little different. I'm not doing the research myself, and that is a little hard to give up. I really wish I was there, interacting directly with the research that I'm doing. But, I get to see how I'm able to make a difference and change the course of science in a position like this. So I think that's the simple answer for me is making a bigger impact.
Great, that's great. Other thoughts on why?
I'll chime in here.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Arturo.
Thank you, Anna. I'll chime in and say, what Chris said, plus when I was at the University of Arizona, that's where I started out post-grad. I got tenure at the University of Arizona and very easily saw myself being there for the next 20, 30 years. And I think it was that comfort level that made me uncomfortable, because as I look back at my training as a PhD student, there really was only one path that was available to me. This might be different for other fields and other students, but economists professors teach economist PhD students to be economist professors. And so unfortunately, I feel like I was not exposed to what the range of opportunities in the marketplace as a professional were to me. And so when I was at the university and achieved that level of personal success and academic validation of becoming tenured, I think there was a certain comfort level to say, okay, now I've proven myself enough as an academic to my mentors that I can now begin to consider what else I could do. And so there was always that itch that needed scratching. And so I went ahead and made the leap, despite everyone, my colleagues, friends who were in academia thinking that was nuts. You work your ass off to to become tenured, and now that's the first thing you're chucking after getting that letter from the president.
So I wanted to say that, unlike others, I was very ambivalent about taking an academic job right off when I was in grad school at Santa Barbara. And one of the things I found was that I struggled with finding someone that could help me figure it out. or like find the ways of doing it. So what I ended up doing, which is very strange for a sociologist, is going to the College of Engineering, what used to be the program management, something. And I ended up taking classes there with a bunch of engineers and a bunch of people that were getting trained to go into industry, because sociologists, like Arturo was saying, there's one path and that's what you do, you go and teach. And so for me, I went and I got an academic job, a tenure track job, and it became pretty clear very quickly to me that it was not a good match. I was at a small women's college in Boston. I struggled with being a professor, and I realized that I just didn't want to teach. I wanted to do research. And that was kind of what really led me to the decision to leave. And, you know, it was also very clear that I was not going to get tenure. And they had only ever given tenure to, I think, 3 Latinas in 150 years. I was not going to be the exception. So I had to be realistic about my situation there. And it was clear it was not going to happen. So off I went, and I just made this choice. But I had it in my mind that I was going to do what I had Arturo's plans. It just didn't work that nicely at the end of it.
Yeah, and my reason, I think, was pretty different from the other panelists. I knew throughout grad school I wanted to be a professor. I got the tenure track position. I actually really enjoyed it, but my spouse also had a tenure track position on the other side of the United States, and we just could not ever find universities that would, you know, do that partner hire and really honor that we wanted to stay together in our relationship, but we also both wanted to advance in our careers. So unfortunately, I slowly over time, I went from being a faculty member to being an administrator to switching universities, and that the flexibility I needed to have a job in a certain city. And if you want to be an academic, it's very, very hard to have that requirement. If you want to live in a particular city, unless you're really lucky, the likelihood is you probably are not gonna, at least for a tenure track position, it's not gonna happen.
That's great. That's great. Definitely a lot of reasons why it happened. So the next question is more of a what question, and it's balancing the ups and downs, because there obviously there are a lot of positives working in a university setting. So thinking about what the positives are and the negatives working for a university campus, and we'll have Anna start with this.
So I actually made a little list of these things because I figured I would. And so in thinking about this for me, and this, I think this is a very personal decision that one makes about what path to take, to go to a nonprofit, to go to government. So for me, a huge thing was salary. You know, when I took my first government job just out of academia, I almost doubled my salary. That's a lot of money. And I realized that in academia, I was severely underpaid, and that in the government, they were going to pay me a whole lot more money. So, I mean, and I think we need to talk about the financial piece of the decisions we have to make. So that was, to me, that was a huge thing. Talking to people that had left academia, and they said, like, what? They're paying you that much money to live in Boston? And so I think that was for me a big piece of it. And the other thing for me that's an upside is the flexibility. I just want to give you a really quick example. And my sister had a very, very bad accident about 4 weeks ago. And in the government, you accrue sick leave that you can use to care for a sibling. So I took all of my sick leave and came down to Guatemala, and nobody said anything at work, and they said, okay, go take care for your family member. There's absolutely no way I could have picked up in the middle of a semester, come to Guatemala and care for my sister and her 2 children. So to me, that kind of flexibility is just it's there, and I appreciate that very much. So no, so to me, those are two big ones. I mean, for the downsides, you, like Chris was saying, you become a specialist in one little thing, and then suddenly when you go out in the market, you become a generalist. People do not care that you know every citation for like every obscure thing out there. They care that you know how to do a method or a process. That's what they want. There's limitations in publications. There's politics, particularly when you work for government. And then at times you really can't pick the research topic that you're working on. Having worked in several labs, they just, they get projects and you end up assigned to them. So that could be, a bit of a challenge, especially if you have some issues with what is being researched. I have never had that, but I've heard people feeling very uncomfortable with some of the stuff that is brought to them to their social sciences lab. So that's kind of like a very, very general thing, but there's more to it, but I'll let others add to it.
So I'm happy to chime in as well. And what Anna raised, all of those points are same as well, right? My salary jumped by a couple of factors, moving from the academic world, even into the nonprofit world, let alone people I know who have moved into the industrial space. Certainly one, it has to bear in mind that there is a financial cost to staying in academia, but there are pros as well, right? Having been a professor, the safety of tenure is incredibly attractive to people. You know that you're in a fantastic place, you have colleagues, but in some sense, I realized that the safety was not all I wanted out of things, that the safety also made it in some sense boring, for me at least. But there are for people for whom that's not true at all. There are people who really appreciate that, and for good reason. The pros and cons are definitely there. Another aspect of the academic world was, summers, right? I was doing physics research during the summers, but you have this, you're teaching, you're doing research during the academic year, and so summers. Here, even in the nonprofit space, the corporate space, it's a 12-month clock, right? You're working all year round, and you may have vacation time or sick leave time, but it's, you don't have a designated, spring break or summer you can take times off. So there's all pros and cons. I've been very happy with the choice that I made to make the switch, but it was really nice to see both sides. And I guess there's another interesting aspect to it that may apply a little bit more for me in science, and especially being a science funder, is that without having had the time in academia, I would have no street cred in the nonprofit space. So for me, being in the academic world was a prerequisite to being in the world that I am right now. There's a timing of when to make the shift for me as well.
That's great. Other thoughts on this pros and cons?
I'll kind of add a little twist to the conversation. That way it's not repetitive, because one of the concerns I had before making that jump was exactly what some of the concerns that people have addressed about. You're leaving security for insecurity. You're leaving this world of free thinking, and especially when you become tenured, right? You have this academic freedom that is now mostly guaranteed. To go to work in a world that is driven by the profit margin, profit motive. I did jump into nonprofit, so there was some of that was mitigated, but I was very much concerned that I was just going to be a tool or a cog, and that someone else was going to be in charge of turning that wheel, and I had no choice or discretion in that. I've been very lucky, and I think but I've also been very cognizant of where I go to make sure that I have as much integrity as possible in the work that I do. And I think that's something that, for me was a very conscious decision and effort in making sure that when I did look at opportunities, I tried to take all the due diligence to make sure I wasn't stepping into a minefield. You never know until you actually land there. But that's to say that some of the concerns for those that are thinking about leaving, or think about that they're leaving into a greater unknown, or to a world where, it's all backstabbing and people trying to take advantage of each other. that's, at the end of the day, that's a choice that you make, because there are those companies, there are those places that where that's occur, but there's a lot more of where that doesn't occur, and where you do have the ability to to take advantage of all that you can bring to the table, whatever the challenge might be.
Yeah, and the backstabbing occurs in academia too. And all the clicks and all the, my world, you kind of get engrossed in this little world. And, did you get best paper award at this conference? Oh, well, I did, that kind of thing. And then it's really, for me, it was really refreshing to get out of that world and realize all of these people I associate with now don't even know those people in that world. And they felt so important in their own little world, but outside of that, nobody knows who they are anyway. So it kind of just gives a different perspective. The one thing that really scared me about leaving academia was, could I actually work a 9-to-5 job? Like, am I going to wake up at 7 in the morning and have a commute and like be in an office somewhere for 8 hours? Because I had never in my life done that before. And it turns out, as Arturo was alluding to, there's all different kinds of jobs and employers out there. And I'm really lucky. My employer, first of all, I've been a teleworker for almost 4 years now. So this was pre-COVID. I worked from home for many years, and I charge by the hour. So I fill out my timesheet, and every hour I work is an hour I work. It doesn't matter. My employer doesn't care when I do it. I mean, obviously I have to be there for meetings, and I can't just bow out on things, but I can still have that kind of academic lifestyle where I want to run out and go grocery shopping at noon one day on a weekday. I can. So I think some of the stuff that scared me about being out of academia was kind of the perception you see almost like in the movies, right? The 9-to-5 job and all this stuff. And jobs nowadays are not structured that way. And you can look for a job that suits you.
That's great. And Vicky had a comment in terms of her salary, and I think nonprofit, there's a huge variance in terms of where salaries are. So the next question is Arturo is going to start with, and it's really looking back at your transition. If you were going to do it all over again, what would you do differently from your university position to where you are now? Oh,
Right. That's the first Zoom fail of the day. Everyone note. I was thinking about what I would do different, because, and that's a difficult one to answer, because I'm actually very happy where I am now and the trajectory of my career. Where before at Facebook, I was at Visa. Before at Visa, I was a chief economist at the Federal Reserve. And then before that, so it goes back all the way to getting tenure at Arizona. So it's not that in saying that I would do something different, I regret the choices I've made, but really it's more about lessons learned to tell someone who is at that stage of shifting from academia to non-academia, or thinking about those two options. And that is understanding what opportunities are out there. I made a decision to leave academia and took my next step without really knowing how to get a job, to put it bluntly. You're in grad school, or even in an undergraduate, you're never really taught how to get a job. From the most basic form of just looking around for where your skill sets, your interest, whether it's personal, professional, whatever it may be, lie. And you're left to your own devices to discover that opportunity. And for me as an academic, the easiest and most obvious step was to look for where other economists work. And that is in the nonprofit world in this think tank in San Francisco. And looking at that the decision now, it was a good decision. It was a good institute. I am not regretting coming to San Francisco. In fact, that was a goal of mine, but it was an uninformed decision about the job market. And I would go back in time, give myself advice to talk to more senior people, those who have already had made the move, and, you know, to use a cliche, network with those trusted individuals.
Yeah, I would echo Arturo what you said. I wouldn't say I had regrets, but definitely not being informed about what I was getting into caused me to delay the transition. So I took several jobs as university administrators at different universities because I only knew how to look at, you know, job postings in academia. I didn't even know what other jobs were out there. And I'm not saying I regret, you know, working at any of those places, but I probably prolonged that transition period longer than I could have or should have if I had just known more about how to do a job search outside of academia. And I see someone in the questions has, oh, how did you overcome the perception that PhDs are overeducated and too niche for corporate industry jobs? My solution for that was I just worked at a company where we have a ton of PhDs because then they know what to expect. So I don't have a great answer for that, but I will say that, like I said, the transition period and the fear of just not knowing what to expect or how to do things is something. You're all here for this panel for that reason, and I encourage you to, you know, learn as much as you can. And hopefully you won't get kind of stalled in that gray area where I was for several years.
Yes, I'll agree that the gray area is indeed, you know, the only change that I would make, right? Obviously, I'm similarly happy with where I've ended up, so it's a difficult question to answer. But if anything, I would have tried to learn more about things earlier. And I guess the crucial thing for me would be networking. As I talked to more people as the years progressed, you know, I learned more about other options that were out there that I was just simply unaware of as a grad student, or unaware of as a postdoc, or even unaware of as a faculty member. And as that network got broader, it allowed the network itself to get bigger, but also my awareness of opportunities to get bigger too. So if I had been able to accelerate that, that's what I would have tried to do earlier.
John, if I can also answer that question about how did you overcome the perception?
Please.
I've encountered that in my career because I've not been involved or worked in many places that have had PhDs. Well, even though it seems like, well, you worked at the Fed, the #1 employer of economics PhD in the world. But I was always kind of a black sheep because whenever I was in any org, I was always in the org where the PhDs didn't hang out, and especially and that's similarly true in my current position where I'm in the policy function within Facebook and not in the core data science, the research function. And the way I see the world function and operate, other people operate, is the inverse of the way PhDs and researchers think. We, you know, to use the analogy, we bury the headline in the way we communicate. And if you just make that simple change in the way you interact with people, how you communicate, how you tell your story, lead with the conclusion, lead with the most important thing, that, believe me, is going to change the perception that sometimes is negative, that researchers are, you know, not able to give clear advice. And what I mean by that pyramid, that inversion, is think about the last paper you wrote. Introduction. This problem is really interesting because ... Other people have looked at this issue, and these are the people ... This is the data that will be used ... Here is the model ... here are the different 100 simulations I ran, ... Last paragraph. By the way, the coefficient on the main variable of interest is 0, right? How long that took for you to get there, you've already lost half the audience, right? If not more. And we are, that process, the way of thinking, the way of being so precise and rigorous is all the work that you throw away, never talk about, but is there and is essential. But it's the last bit, that last paragraph that you write is the one people care about the most. So just keep that in mind when you're talking to non-researchers, non-academics, which is the rest of the world.
That's great. And Sarah, bluff bottom line up front, that makes a lot of sense. Any other thoughts? We'll move on. So Chris mentioned, I think he said he had street cred by starting his career in the academy before transitioning out. You know, are there advantages like Chris mentioned in starting your career in the academy, even if you're not looking to stay there for your entire career? And we'll start with Sarah on this one to get her thoughts.
So from my personal experience, I would say the answer is no. And I'm interested to hear what the other panelists have to say, because maybe I'm just being overly negative, but I lost a lot of years of my career in academia. And when I look at my colleagues, I am in a corporation where I have a lot of colleagues with PhDs. When I look at my colleagues with PhDs in psychology around the same time that I got mine, they are at least one, if not two levels higher than me now. So they are, you know, pretty high up leaders in my company. And I'm not. And, you know, I think, you know, when it comes to the academic chops and, you know, how smart are you, we're at the same level. But I lost those years by not having the experience, by having the academic experience, which in my world now hasn't counted, isn't as valued as having that same number of years of experience in my own company.
Yeah, and just to add to Sarah, I think that there needs to be a separation of the personal growth you gain from being in an academic institution. You learn about yourself, you learn about all these things academic-y, and you know, you make friends, you create community, but then the career piece is very much a different story. So if you are able to separate, so from a personal perspective, for me, I was pretty young when I got my PhD, so I needed those years to kind of really become a real adult because I went straight through. And so I had never really had a job. And so that was my first job. So that was great. And I learned important things like a pay stub. That's personal. But then on the professional side, I'm with Sarah. There's, you know, people who are much younger than I am, you know, 5-8 years younger than I am, that got PhDs much later than I did, who are now, you know, chiefs in division chiefs. And I don't regret doing the academic piece, but in terms of career growth, it didn't give me much, especially with fellow PhDs, because just as in academia, people talk smack about those that have left, in, you know, in government or in a nonprofit world, people will talk smack about those that have stayed in academia. So I think it's just, there's all of this coming back and forth. So I want people to be really aware of these are some of very personal decisions and experiences. Others help you with a job.
Yeah, and since my name came up, I would totally agree with that. I think it depends on the job as to how much it's valuable. You know, for me, I'm working with academics, and so having that prior academic connection is necessary as a funder to be able to speak their language. So it's much more of a benefit to my current job. but it doesn't have to be necessarily for every other job. So all of these, I think this answer is very much sort of a personal question. It's where you end up, and as to how much of a difference it'll make, but just sort of having an eye on the opportunities, I think is probably the best advice.
Excellent. Arturo, anything to add?
Yeah, I think my only thought about that is that in most cases, people don't have a grand plan that actually comes to fruition. And so if going into an academic position is part of a grand plan, 5-year, 7-year plan, be prepared for, for that plan to actually not occur. So I would say, if you want to go into academia, make it as much about a decision that is right for you, as much as deciding not to go into academia. But I think as a layover or part of as a plan, I think it may not be as effective as one of the other two choices.
That's great. That's great. So Chris alluded to the idea of being a specialist in a very narrow area versus being a generalist. I think that was Chris. And so I wanted to focus a little bit more on that and think about impact that you can have as an academic versus in a non-academic role, and get the panelists' thoughts on what that looks like. We'll start with Chris for that.
Yeah, so perhaps for me, it's easiest to share a specific, set of stories, right? So as an academic, I was certainly doing fantastic research, or at least it was fantastic to me and the probably 10 other people who cared about what I was doing. But jumping into the nonprofit world, it was actually really stunning the amount of impact I was able to make to all of science. So within just a year or two of showing up at the Kavli Foundation, we had been working with the White House to insert language into the State of the Union address, working with congressional appropriators to get what is now the better part of a $400 million per year federal initiative started. And as a professor, maybe I would have been on, eventually, if I'd stayed, I might have been on some advisory committee somewhere that might have been making advice like that. But just the turnaround time, right? Being able to see something happen right away, from being able to bring the right groups of people together, was really stunning. So it was really amazing to me, and really kind of fed into my desire to have a big impact, to be doing something that so visibly to me was in fact affecting the entire world and the scientific community, which is my desired goal. So I think in some sense this also yields back to the other point about academia versus non-academia. There are pros and cons to both, right? As I said, I'm not doing the research anymore, so I'm not actually pushing the boundary of science myself. And so if that's something that is really important to you, maybe you do want to be in there. If you're willing to work through others, maybe you want to be in a different sort of position. And so thinking very carefully about yourself, your own, desires, your own capabilities, what kinds of goals you want to set for yourself, may also help you choose what kind of directions you might want to explore. But as I think we're kind of repeating ourselves here, simply being aware of the possibilities and being open to them is something that's always worthwhile.
I think one of the advantages of being academia is the academic freedom, obviously, but it's not something you want to take for granted. It is a gift, that's there, and that academic freedom lets you pick your topic, your research methods, and it might be the case that you only get cited by 3 people, but then 20 years later, your paper gets rediscovered, and it's the one, it was the fountainhead of something major. And that, in many ways, that's a sad outcome, right? Because there you were toiling away in obscurity, and it took, and you may be toiling away in obscurity for the rest of your career. Whereas and then part of that process, of course, you need to perform, you need to demonstrate impact to get tenure. You need to be able to cite, in my case, a social sciences citation index, right? How many people have cited you, and what was the impact of your journal publications as measured, determined by some metric that's accepted by the academic community. And and just a month ago, I was pretty much put in my place when my team put out a series of reports, one of which had over 150,000 downloads in the space of 2 weeks, and I stopped counting. And you know, none of my papers, none of my talks will ever get that level of recognition or publicity. But you know, and numbers don't mean anything, but it just gives you a sense of what the potential impact is, but also the difference in impact that you're trying to achieve in one world versus the other.
I'd love to piggyback off of that because I'm having a similar experience right now, Arturo. So it's interesting that you mentioned that. For my work right now, we are trying to decide where we have a number of articles we wanted to publish, and one of them we had thought would be a journal article. But when we thought about it more, we thought, you know, there's really not a theoretical contribution here. It's not contributing anything new in terms of advancing scientific knowledge, and I don't think a journal will accept it. So we decided we'll publish it as a white paper because it is a lot of actionable information that is not groundbreaking. It's not, you know, particularly new, but it's put together in a way that people who have to make decisions about things and who have to really do applied work would need to know. And so we decided we'd just publish it as a white paper and distribute it on different websites and have it, if you're not familiar with the Open Science Framework, so it'll be on OSF, so available to anyone. And you know, for us, that is more impact. Like you're talking about, it's about the impact, and a journal article, to get it together, to make it have some kind of theme that would be publishable in a journal, we're losing the point of what we were trying to do, and the impact wouldn't be the same.
Anna, any thoughts on impact? Obviously, you've having quite an impact in this year, 2020, with the census.
Yeah, so you know, one of the things that I'm both humbled and amazed at is how, you know, qualitative sociologists can sit in a room and have an impact. So when, just as an example, the citizenship question that the administration had requested be added to the census, I ended up being a part of that team, and we ran, you know, some surveys, ran analysis, and, you know, did a lot of work with Spanish speakers and other immigrant groups, hard to reach populations, to be able to give advice to the senior officials at the census and have them put out their recommendations for that kind of policy issues. And, you know, there's other examples of things like that. And I think oftentimes, and this is what I've learned this last couple of years into my position, is that a lot of social scientists are sitting in the room and are providing and pushing, you know, sound science out there. But these people are invisible because they don't have their name in the paper or in the court decision. But they are hundreds of people, at least at the Census Bureau, doing the work, doing the analysis, because that's our job. And so for me, the impact, I mean, that's like a big example, but there's a day-to-day thing in which, like, even the language we use when we translate documents to Spanish, and the kinds of communities we go to, those all have an impact. And so yeah, there's a lot. And, you know, working at the Census Bureau is complicated. And this year has been very interesting, but it's taught me that very important part, that oftentimes you have a team of people, or, you know, people just like any of us here, and providing the information for people higher up to make those decisions. That doesn't mean they always listen to you. Let's just underscore that.
That's great. That's great. So at this point, would love to open it up and see if there's any questions out there. You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. Don't be shy.
I guess, hi, my name's Tom. And I'm just kind of curious about like if my skill set will translate into any kind of hireable position outside academia. Like I can do stats, but I'm not a stats guru. I can write, but I'm not Hemingway. And so I'm just kind of thinking like, is there anybody that could possibly employ me in any kind of position?
Yes.
Yes, I would.
Yes.
I second Arturo's point. Yes, yes, yes. Lots of options. Here's my thing. All of us had to learn how to translate those skills. And remember, graduate school is about making you insecure, that you are not Hemingway. I mean, none of us are, but like you're not a guru. Ultimately, you just got to run the stuff. SAS, awesome. Someone out there needs that skill set. So remind yourself of that. You're in a world in which it's designed to make you question your ability, because that's how you build ability. Out there, they just want to know if you run SAS. Everything else is trainable, I think.
I like that way of thinking about it, Anna, because the Hemingway comment is perfect, right? In the science world, not every scientist is going to win the Nobel Prize, but that doesn't stop us from doing it. But I think a common thread amongst all of us is academia and getting a PhD. It's about being sort of like the top. Whereas these other jobs, whether it be corporate, whether it be nonprofit, whether it be government, it's all about team. And you need incredible team players. And not all of those team players are Hemingway. Probably none of them are Hemingway. But all of that team is necessary to make really big things happen. And so it's a different way of thinking about selves. You're not have to always thinking about you're being the best in the room. It's just you are part of a team and you're a team player that helps make something big happen.
Yeah, and I would say communication skills, those go a long way. You can get by without really having no technical knowledge about almost anything at all. And if you can communicate well and figure out, like we talked about before, I think it's a great point, what the conclusion is and get that out first and work well with other people, be collaborative, be communicative. A lot of what you need outside of academia does not come down to any kind of technical skills.
And I'll also add like a little bit more of the nuts and bolts part of this process is that there is no street corner for PhDs, right? It's not the day labor market, which I used to study, where you can, if you're a day laborer, you know where to go and you know how to read and switch from one corner to the next. And this process of finding a job is one that is inevitably going to have some psychological scarring, because it takes forever for you to find a job that you believe you're qualified for. And then you have to learn how to read job descriptions, because the person writing the job description is writing for someone who never exists. They're looking for Hemingway and Albert Einstein and Martin Luther King all at the same time. So of course, that discourages anyone from ever applying. So there's that fine line between how you communicate and how they communicate what they're looking for. So you have to be aware of that. Then when you actually get through the black hole of HR filters to actually speak to someone, that might be a 6 to 8 week process. And then still comes the interviews, and then this comes the decision, by which point 3-4 months have passed from the point you've actually have been successful at getting a job interview and then be getting turned down. And it's a very, very psychological scarring, because when you go through that and you constantly either get no response whatsoever, which is beyond me in this day of algorithm. Can you just tell me someone already got picked for this job? Someone knows in HR they got hired, so, and they have a list of people who applied. Just send another email saying, no, already been filled, right? Doesn't happen. So it's a very, very different process in academia, where it's very personal at some point, right? So that impersonal nature is something that you need to make it impersonal for you when you are caught in its whirlpool.
Yeah, and John, do you mind if I just had I had jotted down a few things about kind of like tips for just knowing what different jobs are out there and what they require.
That would be That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've used some of these techniques and other ones I've helped other people use. So first is if you're a current student, find an internship. Do an intern. There are graduate interns. My company hires graduate interns. You get paid way more than you get paid as a TA or an RA. So if you're a current student, definitely look into what it's like to do an internship somewhere in a place where you think you might fit in. And it might be just a quarter long or a summer long. And, you know, if it didn't work out or it didn't fit, but that's a great way to get your foot in the door, especially if it's a company you think you're going to work well in. The other thing is to do an informational interview. And that means you find somebody and you ask them you interview them, not for a job, but you interview them to learn about what they do in their job. And people love to talk. I'm a psychologist. People love to talk about themselves. So how do you think you got this panel of people together? We're all talking about ourselves, right? You can approach pretty much anyone and ask them for an informational interview, because it's just them talking about themselves, what they do, what they're good at, what the job requires. And that's just a good way for you to understand and learn about different jobs at very low risk, right? You have a conversation with someone, it's over, and you know, you don't put yourself out on the line for that. Because I agree with Arturo. The more you apply for these things and get rejected, you know, it does definitely deflate your ego. And then the strategy that I use that I don't know if I would recommend, I had a patio party. So I just gathered some friends of mine who had PhDs, but went straight into the workforce and didn't take academic jobs. And I invited them over to my patio, and I just grilled each one of them. What do you do? What is that like? What about you? And I said, well, what do you think I could do? And so I just sat around with a group of friends and acquaintances. Some of them were not good friends, and just tried to grill them for information about what some different jobs out there are like, with people who had PhDs in psychology as well. So I will shut up now, and I'm sure other people have a lot of other good suggestions.
Yeah, I want to throw in a pitch here for the AAAS Science and Technology Fellowships for people coming from the science side. It's a good sort of transition from academia to learning about the other things, because you spend a year or two either working for an executive branch agency or Congress. And so you get to sort of learn about this other world by putting your toe in it, just like the internships that Sarah was just describing now.
And here I will put a pitch for the federal government, which there's tons of internships. There's one that particularly targets underrepresented groups called Pathways. USAjobs.gov has all the jobs, because by law they have to be published, including our internships. And yes, this year I've worked with 2 graduate interns, and many of those, not all, but a good group of them, because they have clearance, because they've tried the job, will lead to a permanent position. And that is because they now know how the system functions. And if they liked it, it's great. And if not, they get really great references. So I like to pitch that. And also, I know that there's questions about where these like jobs, you know, being posted. So USAjobs.gov is really a good resource. And there's also professional non-academic organizations like like APOR, which is the organization I belong to now, the American Association for Public Opinion Research. There's also the American Statistical Association for those of you that are more statistically inclined. So start looking for those industry associations, because those often have a job market area out there.
That's great. And for those of you out there that are offering internships, please, Karen's put down Lana Smith Hale, who works specifically with graduate students, or reach out to myself as well. We'd love to be able to connect those internships with our graduate students, because they are hungry for them. That's definitely something that we hear quite a bit. So Well, as we're nearing the hour, I wanted to wrap up and thank our panelists again, all four of our panelists joining us from around the world, literally, Chris in New Zealand, Anna in Guatemala, and then we have Sarah in DC, Arturo only in San Francisco, so he's relatively close, but multiple different time zones. So thank you to all of our panelists, and then Alumni Affairs. Want to thank Karen and Kayla for helping put this together and for all of the events that they're putting on. They've got a couple more career-related talks coming up today and tomorrow. And Karen also mentioned the Gaucho Network. That is, it's like LinkedIn, but for UCSB alums. And you can actually search for folks that are that have a PhD degree, for instance. You can search by different degrees. You can search by region, and so that's a really good tool as well. If you have any questions about graduate education or would love to get involved, speak to current graduate students, happy to help facilitate that. And so again, want to thank everyone for joining us.